Hey everyone, this is Nick with Tenacity.ai with my co-host Jason. Today we're going to dive into the phases of FinOps. Furthering our FinOps series here, we want to jump into the actual life cycle and what those phases are, what happens in each of those phases. Those phases, just to frame them up really easily: inform, optimize, operate. What do you do in each of those? So Jason, I guess let's dive into a definition maybe for each of these. Can you give us kind of a high level definition, the one sentence or two sentence of each of these for our viewers or our listeners?
Sure. Inform, first phase, is all about visibility into your cloud usage, your cloud spend, and allocating that environment out in your context. That's probably the simplest way to put it. It does encompass a few more things, but it's essentially about visibility and allocating your environment out so that you can, one, get access to all of the data around your usage and spend, and two, understand what portions of the business in your context are using those things. The optimize phase is the second phase, and is more about identifying and measuring of optimizations like right sizing, underutilized resources, or maybe abandoned resources. We also like to think that it includes some level of misconfiguration management, because there are lots of examples of how resources like S3 as an example can be misconfigured and be costing you a lot more money. So you're overutilizing said service. And then the operate phase is implementing the processes to make sure that you're doing all of the things that on a recurring basis, and that you've changed the culture within the organization so that you're continually providing the visibility and allocation that you need. Yeah. So when you spin up new resources, and then you're also doing the optimization on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I would if I were to put them into one word, other than inform, optimize, and operate, but to give them color,
a different word.
It would be, well, I mean, in because you see this, this is the scientific method. You see it in Agile. You see it in all sorts of models and frameworks. Mm-hmm. You always have your first phase as your define phase. You want to actually define what your goals are, what you're going after. That's what the inform phase does for you. You want to have an evaluate or identify phase where you actually go and find, now that you've defined everything, you want to find what you want to act upon. That's what the optimize phase is. And then you, of course, want to actually go take action. So that's what the optimize phase is actually execution on it. So let's dive into that inform phase. What are the sorts of activities that our listeners are going to be going through when they're in the inform phase? By the way, this is cyclical, so this is continuous. So you're going to come back to the inform phase constantly. What are the things that you're going to
unless no one creates new resources, unless somebody doesn't create new resources, right?
Even then,
yeah, right, exactly.
Things still change. The world changes around you.
Right, the world. So yeah, this is where you need to make sure that you have all of the data, right, and that you've figured out and agreed upon where the source of this data is coming from. A good example of that would be with AWS, like their cost and usage report with AWS, which is the system of record for all their billing. So then it's about taking that data and mapping it to what matters to the business the most, right? Mapping the spending categories. So this could be by, could be by business unit, it could be by product, it could be by customer, it could be by specific person deploying, like an engineer deploying cloud resources. Whatever's contextual to the business, right? It's different in a lot of cases. And the output of this is, reporting like show back and things like that. Maybe another output of this is maybe you can't allocate your entire environment because you don't have a strategy to make sure that you can map each resource. So there's a couple of examples. Why don't you give me a few more that you want to add to, those two that I brought up?
Well, I think it's important to touch on this whole like mapping the data out to the business. We've talked about this. We've hit it. Everyone, if you've been listening, we've hit on this one a number of times, and it's so important.
Foundation.
It is. Yeah, it's the foundation, and it's the gotcha as a technology leader. Not being able to define who owns something or who's accountable to it or why it's there is the gotcha in IT operations or in tech operations or in writing code that I've experienced my entire career. So that's a really important one. I think, defining budgets and forecasts, like what are we going to forecast on? What's our tolerance for variance? These are all part of the inform phase. And listen, we're talking about the whole spectrum of maturity right now. We're not saying you have to do this like step one. You don't have to know your tolerance for variance when you're just trying to get this implemented, but you will be at some point trying to figure that out. You're going to determine, I have a 3% tolerance for variance from budget. Maybe I have a 5% or a 10%, depends on what mode you're in as far as a business. But that's not going to come until you have some of the other components figured out. So you're going to come back to this phase. It's cyclical, right? So we're continuously improving. It's also sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. It's also defining your strategy around how you're going to manage environments, what tagging strategy you're going to use. So once you figure out kind of who owns what, well, how are you going to identify that, right? Are you going to set a departmental code, a cost center? Are you going to put dates on it so that you can look at timing and expiration of resources? Are you going to put actual owners from a deployment perspective? Was this deployed automatically? Was this deployed manually? Who was responsible for doing that, or what function was responsible for doing that, so that you can report on those various aspects? Those are the things you're going to be thinking about in the inform phase. Again, this is about stages of maturity. Initially, it might just be trying to tie it back to some area of the business or some line of revenue.
Correct.
That might be the simplest thing to do, or just maybe simply the environment, production versus dev versus test versus other
correct.
or unknown. Get those bundled up. Shared's another one. Shared. Like we keep saying this, like, don't worry about your shared costs. When you first start out, you're going to worry about those a little bit later, but at least identifying that they are in fact shared, and then figuring out what to do with those, as you mature kind of the model, is important. It's also setting goals. It's the inform phase is about, and these will change constantly. This is why it's continuous. It's creating those first sets of goals. They're gonna define your metrics for you. An example of an early goal, and we'll cover this in the next episode because I think we'll dive deep here. But an example of an early goal might be that I just want to have some percentage of my environment tagged. And it might be that right now
50% or something, right?
Right. You might be at 10 or 15 right now. We see that very commonly when the platform, when Tenacity's integrated, and we look at tagging compliance, like to have only 10 or 15% of the environment is actually pretty normal.
And by the way, this isn't 10 or 15% of your environment with a tag on it. It's 10 or 15% of your environment tagged with something that's uniform and meaningful across all resources, right? That's what I will point out here.
That helps you understand your environment.
Yeah, right. Most people have at least one tag on each resource, but that doesn't mean that it helps you. We're talking about, do I have environment prod standardized across all my resources, or do some of them say ENV prod? Do some of them use camel case? Do some of them use all lower? Like, we're talking about the standardization of those things. So the good first goal is environment prod, all uniform across all resources, right?
Well, in here, you're bringing up a good point. Like, no matter where you are in this journey, because we've had it both. We've had it where there are a smattering of tags throughout the environment. In fact, sometimes the environment's 90% tagged, but it's useless tagging. Other times we've been in there where there's nothing tagged, and there's just nothing. And this is very much a check your ego at the door moment. Doesn't matter what's been done in the past. It doesn't matter what it looks like right now. This inform phase is about defining what that's going to be. Right. So we're gonna come up with what our strategy is. We're gonna define some benchmarks for ourselves. We're gonna create a scorecard to measure ourselves, and then we're gonna go achieve something. And that might be that in the first phase, the first go around of this, that we're gonna get to 50% compliance or something like that. So that's your inform phase. Optimize. Jason, what are the activities? Actually, optimize, I think everybody kind of has in their head, this is a really big thing that's going to happen. In optimize is a surprisingly well-defined kind of concise phase. What happens in the optimize phase?
You get better at not paying for stuff you don't need. At a high level.
Or at least identifying it.
Or at least identifying it, right? Yeah. At least identify, which is getting better at it, right? The first step to solving any problem is identifying, what is part of the problem. But yeah, it's about identifying, not only just identifying resources that may be underutilized or need right sizing, things like that, which is low hanging fruit. If I've got something that's not being used, I can shut it off and stop paying for it immediately. So It's not just about getting a hold of the low hanging fruit, being able to identify that. It's also about understanding where you are from a commitment management standpoint, how you're leveraging usage-based discounts versus spend-based discounts like reserved instances and savings plans, and then making calculating recommendations on where you should be as well, right? So
let me break it down really simply for the listeners. You're going to worry about rate optimization and you're going to worry about usage optimization. All right. And what you're doing here is you're not necessarily fixing it. You're identifying it. You're trying to find it where stuff underutilized, maybe it's abandoned, maybe it needs to be right-sized. I would add, and this isn't covered a lot in the topics, but I would also add that it's about configuration here too, because there are default configurations that can result in a lot of spending that is unnecessary. So it's identifying those usage-based things where we can actually,
underutilized, abandoned, right-sized, overutilized, misconfigured, all of those things that lead to spend that you shouldn't be spending or usage that you shouldn't be using.
That's right. So that's part of optimize. The next part of optimizing you think about is the rate optimize. And this is about your tolerance for risk and where, what you want to achieve from a rate optimization perspective, from a commitment-based discount perspective. We'll dive into that in another episode, like in detail about how to build a strategy for rate optimization, because it's a lot of science. It's also a lot of art. It is going to be a lot about collaboration with finance and what sort of risk that you want to take on. And then, the third thing to be thinking about here, or what kind of ties it all together, is remember in the form phase, we decided on a strategy and we decided on a set of goals. Now it's defining the metrics we're going to use in order to measure to those goals. That's what the optimize phase is all about. Is we need a set of a few metrics where we can say, all right, we're going to recover 10% of the environment from usage-based optimization in this first phase, or we're going to build our strategy for a broad near-term, maybe savings plan strategy, 1 year savings plan, in order to get us initially started while we figure out the rest of our rate optimization strategies. Maybe it's something like that. Like you're gonna define some KPIs you want to measure against in the environment. So that's optimize phase.
It helps you scope it too. Like if you want to take care of the biggest hitters first, right? So absolutely, it does help scope the problem, especially if it's a big one.
Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about operate phase. So this is where a lot of activity is going to happen. This is where you put your hands on the keyboard and really start to take action in the environment. So operate, Jason. What happens?
This is where, those goals that we talked about, the KPIs that we want to track, this is where we set the processes that help us achieve those goals, right? One of the things that's important in the operate phase is this is when you start to take all of the data from the inform phase and then show that to the business, right? To the stakeholders, right? To the people that matter the most in the context they want to see it. And you're going to get a whole bunch of questions, right? This is the first time people have been seeing data in this light. Like, how much is prod costing? How much is this business unit costing? So it's also about implementing process or changing the culture to make sure that this sort of stuff continues to happen this way, like your tagging strategy, right? To make sure that new resources we're able to inform and allocate them. It's, automating all of the optimization we talked about, right? Right sizing, deleting instances that should, right? All the goals that we talked about from the optimized phase around usage and
taking action on it.
Taking action on them, right?
Action. And I would say automate, don't get hung up. Engineers, you just heard that word, and you're going to want to go and automate first. Like that's later in the maturity model.
Yeah. Well, like it again. These phases are set up as you so eloquently put out, and they align with pretty standard, right? You can't automate a process in which you don't really understand what needs to be automated yet, right? So
doesn't stop us from trying, Jason.
I know, but I was asked, well, what are you gonna automate? Well, I don't know yet. Okay, well, then do it manually a couple times. Better yet, So anyway, yes, I agree with you. It's about doing manually first, those cost optimization efforts, and taking what you've learned from doing them manually and updating the processes, whether they be in your Terraform code or in the application code, how it gets deployed, whatever the case may be. It's about implementing those at some point when you understand what needs to be solved.
Yeah,
what else?
I agree. There's going to be. Well, I think you've actually covered pretty much everything there. Right. But it's reporting, actually getting to the stakeholders. It's internally, cleaning up, taking action upon, doing the optimization. Remember, it's a cycle, so you don't have to get it perfect. You don't have to do it all. Do some, and then let's keep going through the cycle. Let's keep understanding how our goals need to change, and identifying where the next batch of things we can optimize is. So it's that automation piece. Jason's absolutely right. Yes, we can automate immediately. I always want to jump on the keyboard and automate immediately because that's who I am and my nature, but I also know it's better for me to actually go through and work in the environment, understand what's really happening before I go figuring out what actually needs to be fixed from an automation or code perspective. A good example of this is like lifecycle policies, right? Like I could go and set a bunch of lifecycle policies so that they're set, on default upon how I deploy my S3 buckets or whatever. But if I haven't actually gone through and done the cleanup and asked the questions, then how do I know what I'm supposed to be setting? What if I actually do need 7 years worth of versions for some sort of regulatory requirement on something, right? So correct. I need to go through and do that collaborate piece, that working with the rest of my team, understanding how the environment's configured currently. Is that done on purpose, or is it just that, somebody set something by default to have versioning turned on, but keep every version forever and ever and ever? Well, clearly I probably need to clean that up, but I should talk to someone first so I know.
Correct.
Cool. All right. I think we've probably hit on all of this. The next episode, we're going to tackle actually how to start this versus how to mature this. So tune into the next episode. We'll cover off on how to build your strategy through these phases, instead of just a overview of the phases. Jason, anything to add in parting?
Nope. Subscribe now.
That's right. Subscribe now. Head out to Reddit. The /r/cloud cost optimization subreddit is where you can find us. Ask your questions. We'll have them on the show. And tune in next time. Of course, go check out tenacity.ai, download the cloud cost optimization handbook, or set up for a demo. We're happy to do a free assessment and show you where we can help you accelerate your FinOps journey. Thanks everyone for listening.